welcome everyone to this. I've lost count. However many community call we've had. Good to see a bunch of you in the chat. As always, you will get priority if you ask questions in the chat. Apparently, you can also unmute yourself spontaneously today, so do that if you feel like it, and I will give you priority. First, let me make sure my headphones are actually on. Bluetooth. So let's just jump into the agenda. So these are the 4 points. There was another point which was going into the rebranding of Atlas, but that actually got a bit complicated last minute. We have some difference of opinion in what direction that should go. So I'm going to wait until next time, or hopefully that's settled. So we're just going to go through these 4 points. First is the mainnet timeline, which of course always keeps shifting. The milestones are the same, but when they are in time, does tend to drift. So I'll go into that. Then it's the mainnet governance, which has, I think I have some interesting conclusions for you guys today. Some of them will be kind of a matter of fact based on parameters that will be set in the Genesis block and in the runtime. So there is significant effort in changing them. Others are just my recommendation about what I think ought to be going on and what people should be thinking about. But, that's up to the people who will be participating to actually decide. And as an extension of that, I'll go through some key parameters of the blockchain in general that will be able to tell you a little bit about its kind of properties and profile, and then I'll get into the question section. But as I said, there aren't a ton of questions, and the questions were kind of difficult this time, so I feel like I may not be able to elaborate that deeply on what was asked. But so if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Okay, so the timeline, that's always where we start. We have the next community test starting now next Tuesday. So that's with a real Genesis block, full fees, real parameters as far as we know. Let's say majority of founding members have their tokens. They can test them, real vesting, real launch process. So I think before that network release, on the next community call, basically, I'll probably do a breakdown which explains how exactly we go online. It's not just turning a switch and then everything works. It's a kind of a gradual process. So I'll be able to explain that a bit. So a realistic bootstrapping process, basically. And then we've afforded about 6 weeks from that till actual mainnet launch. And throughout this whole period, you can still keep earning joy. I guess I should say something about what's been the source of the delays. So far, it has been mainly on the runtime side, which is a bit unusual. Mostly for us, when we do releases, the runtime is so far ahead that we're playing catch up with our query infrastructure and our other storage nodes and like apps and CLI and other products. That's not the case here. At this point, it's really the runtime guys who are really working very hard to try to get every loose end that we didn't think, every security issue, every denial of service problem that we kind of always push to the side, settled. And we've had some very interesting findings. I won't go into all of them, but we may have some interesting news about some of the things we've identified. So that's really the main source of complexity so far, and while the timelines keep shifting. I believe that there should be very little uncertainty in the Carthage to mainnet interval, because really there could only be maybe some parameters needing to be tweaked that we learn. There shouldn't really be any problems at that point. I mean, so that's the timeline. Let me go into the governance as the first kind of major topic here today. And it's useful to kind of look into what has testnet governance been like and what was the point there. And as you guys obviously know, we've been working really hard at trying to find great people who would be both trained and incentivized to run the system once it's live. That's really been the main focus on the governance side. And so all of the things we've done have been very focused in finding people, giving them an opportunity, making sure they get feedback, making sure they get connected to other people, having reasonably objective kind of evaluation criteria, although that is very difficult And we've gone through many iterations with this, where we started with people reporting what they did, and we had a KPI scheme as the next iteration. We had the pretty complicated network scoring scheme that's still running called Incentives 3. And there was also extensive reporting to JS Genesis. I have the distinct impression that too many of the people involved, even people who are very experienced, believe that all of these things that we've been doing are things that should be happening on Mainnet. That is very much not the case. So all of these things are artifacts of the objective we have on Testnet, which has nothing really to do with the Mainnet objective. The Mainnet objective, this is of course subjective, but my subjective opinion about what the objective ought to be for everyone is to make the platform work well, to grow, to solve the problems that we've talked about as being the opportunity for us to solve for creators and audiences and developers. That's the actual goal, and the governance activities we do should be a function of that. All these other things have been mostly about finding and training and giving you guys incentives. So I think it's really important to make sure that once it launches, we don't have people kind of imitating just what you were doing before, because that's kind of the thing that you do. That's very important. And, throughout these phases, I think we, hold on. Right, so I guess I went ahead of myself a little bit here, but basically we did not focus on the system working very well. The network scoring system did have some sensitivity to this. It tried to say things like, if your storage system can resist a certain denial of service attack, which I'm not sure how well was ever actually examined, then your score will be such and such. That's maybe the one outlier, but in general, it was not very focused on the efficiency of how things was actually operating. And I think that really was unavoidable given the goals we had and the 1 week periods and all the artifactual things from Testnet, but they aren't what Mainnet ought to be about, in my opinion. So what did we kind of experience through all these testnets? We saw quite a lot of participation, a broad range of it. There were I would say more really, really great people than I would have thought, but still, of course, they're relatively few in the overall mix. But I think when I think of how many people are absolutely needed and how many people we found which are phenomenal, I think we've actually succeeded in finding more phenomenal people that are absolutely needed. The reason we still have a lot more people is because we always knew and thought you do need redundancy. You have one person show up, be really great, have a lot of time, their personal situation works out, but then once you launch, something happens and they can't really be involved anymore. So we knew we needed to have substantial redundancy, but I think we have a good number of really great people, and I think people know largely who those people are. I think we also saw the organization get very, very big. So I just picked some stats off the Pioneer app. I think this was yesterday. I believe. I think this is accurate. So this counts 88 people in some kind of a role, paid role, with repeating payments across all working groups and council. And that's a very big organization if you think. It's way, way bigger than JS Genesis. And this does not include actual content creators or bounty workers or validators or nominators who also need to be paid when you get to the real thing. So it's just a very large organization, and I would say in general that's it's bad if you think that all those people will be operating full-time, because it's very hard, as I'll get to coordinate and incentivize and pay for and get all those people to produce good output. Certainly just off of launch, right? Because this will be a totally fresh organization. I don't think I've ever heard of an organization that starts from like 0 to 150 people just overnight without any gradual kind of evolution. There's been a lot of churn. I don't have any data on that, but that's kind of, I think it's pretty clear that people come and go, and one period someone has one role, another period they don't have the role. That's obviously has its downsides when you think about the efficiency of how things are going to work. I think there has been not that much collaboration internally compared to what one would like to see, right? What you would have liked to see is something like, the builders solving problems on behalf of the storage people or the HR people. So people kind of working together to solve overarching issues. Now, I say this not to blame people, because people had to follow this scoring system, and there were all of artifactual things, but when it comes to how things ought to work in reality, a lot of those things haven't been achieved. That's sort of my main point. And I think also, and I think that has to be said, in many occasions there have been a lot of free riding, so people who kind of let other people do substantially more work than they do. Right now we have a 5-person council. I think that problem has been much more ameliorated now. We used to have a 20-person council. You should remember. I think we've even had a 24-person council, and there you really did see that, so much so that council members wouldn't even vote, for example. So I think we've learned some valuable lessons from running the testnets that inform kind of how governance ought to work when we're setting the parameters for Mainnet. So what are those? Number one, you need a smaller number of people across the board in all working groups, the council, everywhere. And this is because it really helps with being able to monitor the system, because you have to remember there is going to be no JS Genesis as such, which is responsible for saying, Freakstatic did a good job, or this person did a bad job, or you get this many. Like, that is not part of how the system works now. Now the token voters in general are supposed to be the people who are kind of selecting the right council members, and doing so based on the effectiveness of those council members. And if you have a large number of them and a very large organization in general, it may be very hard for voters who already have kind of incentive problems for showing up to do that well. And of course, as I mentioned, having a very large organization in general is very hard to do well. There will be free riding. It is very expensive. I think also, as a second point, there should be more people who spend a bigger share of their time, ideally full-time, working in the DAO compared to now, which is understandable that that's where we are now, because that really helps with being able to specialize and become really proficient at some smaller part of the system, and also helps with accountability. If you have 10 people who are supposed to do HR stuff, it's really, really easy for that responsibility to kind of dissipate between those people. And also, of course, you should have much more stability. So if people come and go, then new people will need to learn stuff from old people, and you get a lot of time spent trying to make that work. So those are some pretty important lessons, I believe, that should be kept in mind and are informing the parameter settings we're picking for Mainnet. So what's maybe the most important principle I see coming out of this? It's that when you think about elections and firing people going forward on Mainnet, you should not think about them as an opportunity to consistently replace people, because for all the reasons that I just talked about, that's very, very costly. You should get rid of people when something bad is happening. In the council side, the key part of this is the whole concept of constitutionality. That's the property where important proposals, let's say like upgrading the runtime, requires multiple councils in a row to sort of ratify a proposal. So by frequently having elections for the council, you are able to kind of check in, and voters can kind of reject a council, change the composition of the council if they're seeing some hostile proposals are coming through, for example. So that's the mode we should be thinking of elections, not kind of like the way you think of parliamentary elections, where they happen very rarely, and typically you will be just changing everyone involved. So that I think is an important principle also deriving from those observations. I also think that the DAO should shift its focus to try to succeed on a few different areas. It really hasn't done that this far. So one is obviously having real elections. We did have that all the way in the beginning. We did try to incentivize voters to do a good job, but that just became very, very difficult. So that means we haven't really practiced as a community doing voting and, having some kind of structure around elections where you allow council members to announce what they did and what they're going to do, when some kind of structure to the social side, not necessarily the technical side of how a council explains to voters what's going on and what's going to happen in the future and so on. So I think that's important. Maybe the most important thing, which is not happening now, is executing and formulating long-term strategies and goals. Right? Once we launch, the ball is really in the court of the council and the working groups. What do you want to focus on? What creators do you want to attract? Where do you want to spend the money? What should developers be building? Should you focus on having more distributor capacity in Latin America, or should you be working on, improving storage redundancy? There are a million different questions. And unless you have some core strategy that's informing what is the priority of the DAO going forward, given its actual budgets, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to get very chaotic. So having clear priorities and clear strategies that derive from them, I think, is also pivotal for actually being effective in the long term. As I said, internal collaboration and problem solving is going to be key. The builders need to solve the problems that the, let's say, infrastructure providers have. So more like a dog fooding kind of thing, which you would have in normal tech organizations. There are lots of processes that have not been defined. How do you pay creators? What are the terms? How much? How do you explain it to them? How do you explain it to the world? How do you adjudicate the disputes? How much do you pay the gateways? All of these need to reasonably quickly have some kind of process around them. And that's going to be important to establish to be effective. I also think the infrastructure side is something that, because we've been so focused on the DAO, we haven't had a ton of actual usage of the system. We've had surprising amount, but not really kind of at scale. So once you start to get load at scale, it becomes a question of, well, how well is Colossus actually working? Or how well is Argus? These are the nodes that deliver the content and store the content. How are they actually working? So doubling down on that's going to be very important. And then lastly, I think considering some of the runtime enhancements and proposals that didn't make it into Mainnet is something also I think are worth considering. So this is kind of my proposal for what voters should think is important when they elect council members effectively. Okay, so that's the governance side of things. So just to make things a little bit more concrete, we can jump into how is this manifested in the blockchain in terms of parameters, as well as other parameters in the blockchain. Disclaimers needed. Number one, these values are being tweaked. We have some disagreement even in the JS Genesis about what kind of profile should we have as a chain. But this is like the latest set of values I had readily to prepare for you guys today, but it's still being tweaked. All of the, well, I'm going to be quoting a bunch of numbers in fiat. Obviously, the chain cannot pay out in fiat because it doesn't hold any fiat-denominated asset. It only mints Joy. So it's based on a price assumption of what Joy is worth. So this means if you want to pay the same amount of fiat later, it may require a proposal change or a runtime upgrade even to tweak some parameters. And of course, it depends on constraints from the actual Joy market price as well. But all this is based on basically a presumed value of Joy, which is the same value as in the founding member program, which is the last transaction for Joy, which is now, I don't know, however long ago. There may be tweaks as a result of Carthage, but I think they'll be minor. And okay, I'm just repeating this last point. Some of these can be changed with proposals, others require a runtime upgrade. Okay, let's get into it. Council. So the council, and I know some people won't like this, will be reduced to 3. And this really is to kind of make sure we kind of optimize for the goals that I described earlier, being efficient, being easy to monitor, starting small. This can be changed. I don't remember now. I think this needs a runtime upgrade, but it's not terribly hard to change. Each member receives the equivalent of 10K. That can be changed with a proposal, but that's kind of both a recommendation and based on the overall model that I'm kind of going through here. So the assumption is that each council member earns about 10K. a month. There's a daily refill of the council budget. So as some of you will know, there's a budget the council uses to pay for pretty much everything, including their own salaries, working group budgets, worker salaries, creator payouts, so there's a list there. Spending proposals, working group spending, and council bounties. So quite a lot of things. And every day, 25K will be added to that. That happens regardless of what the budget actually is. So if the budget is, $1 billion, then it will be $1 billion and 25,000 when an additional day passes. So, but what you can see is that you get an additional 750K per month in total as a council under this assumption. You just multiply 25 with 30, and that's supposed to cover all those things. So that may sound like a big number. The main driver in that made us set this number was effectively the requirement to pay creators. I think that is by far the biggest pool in that budget. So that's where that's coming from. Okay. I guess I can give a little breakdown of like how do you come up with that number. You sort of think about all the different things. Hope this isn't too small, but all the things that the council has to pay for. So you can assume things about how big each one would be, let's say the first year, and then you just add it all up. Edivern is asking, would it be possible to spend the leftovers if there is any? Yes, it does. So the way the budget works, I know I promised to make a video on how council budgets work way back when nobody understood them. It seems like then quite a lot of people understood them, and then I never did it, so I should probably make one for Mainnet at least, because it's important to understand. But yes, so when I said 25K per day, that does not mean that you have to spend 25K. It means you are able to spend another 25K. You don't lose that ability ever if you don't use it that day or in the future. So you should think of it as being part of your budget, basically. Because it may not be possible to spend everything at the start. I'm not sure what that means, but it seems like you're on board with what I'm saying. So so you just go through the different things the council has control over. So they have to pay their salaries, 3 of them, 10 each, 30K, boom. Spending proposals, let's just say 5K. Maybe that's a bit low, but hey, there you go. We haven't had a tremendous amount of really good spending proposals, so I think that's fine. Then there are a bunch of working groups that I sort of said are not that important to have a ton of people working a lot on right from the get-go. So I just averaged them out to 2K a pop, which is quite low. I hope people are not offended by this. You'll see this is quite expensive, and the inflation and everything. You have to see it all in one big picture, but that's sort of how I think arguably maybe some of these needs to be distinguished. Let's say the membership and forum I think are very, very low. There's a low need, but maybe marketing quite a lot more, content maybe a lot more, same HR maybe in the middle. But yeah, that's sort of the assumption that went into that. The gateway group is a bit different because there you need to kind of invest ahead of having a bunch of utilization. So maybe you want to spin up and have the council pay for 3 or 4 gateways with different kind of focus area. So gateways, for those who don't know, are basically applications that serve some part of the content that lives in the JoyStream system. So it's like a website or a mobile app or something like that. Sort of equivalent to the play.joystream.org that's already up there, but it's operated by workers in the gateway working group. Builders had an assumption of 5 people at 10K, so that's another 50K. Then there's a longer story about storage working groups where you can think of having, let's say, 10,000 channels and a number of videos and how big each is, and you can use some costs around how much cloud storage costs and the redundancy involved, and then you get a number, which here was 100K. Distributors, you do another analysis sort of like that. Here it says 1,000 daily active users watching 10 minutes a day. Then you just multiply how much data that is, and then you use the cost of bandwidth on Amazon, and that gives you 30K here, I believe. Creator payouts is based on 1,000 creators receiving $500 a month, which I think is quite a lot, possibly, but you can see there that's a very big number. So that's why I said creators are really generating a lot of the cost in the system. And right from the get-go, there won't be 1,000 creators, right? So yeah, it's kind of an average thing. Sungoku is asking, council term is 1 month. Oh, did I skip that? Oh, I forgot. No, council term announcing period. So that's embarrassing. Announcing period is 14 days. Voting period is 3 days. Revealing period is 3 days. And idle period was 1 day. So I'm sorry for forgetting that. I know there was something I'd forgotten here. So you add that up, it's 21 days or something. Yeah. Oh, you're saying 21 days. So where did I actually go through that? Okay, maybe you already knew for some reason, but yes, it is 21 days. That may be shortened, possibly. And that's, again, to make it easier to more frequently challenge the council if they're trying to pass a hostile proposal of some kind. Not to actually change everyone in the council every 21 days, just to reiterate my point from the earlier slides. Yeah, so that's the creator side, and then you have the validator side. Here, we're picking the same staking payment mechanism as you have in most Substrate / Polkadot Kusama systems. So we're targeting a staking rate of 50%. So we're saying we are trying to encourage about 50% of all Joy tokens to be locked for staking. Remember, that does not preclude you from using them for other activities that you want to do, like voting. It does preclude you from doing other activities that may be / like being a worker. So there's like a set of things you can do and a set of things you can't do. But yeah, 50% is the target, and we're going to be setting the kind of total inflation rate to 3%. I think this number needs more feedback because I kind of very roughly picked that out of thin air, looking at some other chains that may be a bit low. I'm not sure, but that's the inflation rate for nominators and validators, and then you can just roughly calculate based on the market cap and the how much that would be per month for validators, and then you get this total number of $905,000 per month in total in spending, basically. I hope that makes sense. All right. So as I just explained, basically, the council has $750K a month. The validator payments don't come out of the council budget. That's a separate minting process. So that gives you $905K per month, which is about $10 million maximum. Again, remember, it's maximum, not actual. There's no need to spend just because the budget has the funds in there. And I assume the spend will kind of be ramping up and be lower than this in the beginning and potentially higher in the end. But then if you calculate that as a percentage of the market cap using all these other assumptions, it's about 18%, which I think is a bit too high. So that suggests, and we are talking about tweaking this to making it be a little bit lower. I don't think it's I'm not so, there is this kind of folklore or whatever in the crypto space of being very concerned with inflation. I think really what you have to think about what you're getting for the inflation. And so if spending about $1 million a month, and that's done well, if the council actually does that well and everyone else involved, you should be able to create more value than those 18%. So that is not very implausible to me. So I'm not very concerned a priori, but the number is a bit high. So we will revisit that, but I think that's the ballpark you should have in mind. Okay, going forward, a little bit more about the chain itself. So as a standard for most Substrate chains, we use so a little bit of information on this in most proof of stake chains in the Polkadot ecosystem. The activity of making blocks is different from the activity of kind of saying what blocks are in the actual heaviest chain. So the first part is called block production, and we're using an algorithm called BABE. I don't remember what that's an abbreviation for, but it's basically a system which has some built-in randomization in who gets to make the next block, so that I think primarily to make denial of service attacks on the next block producer a little more difficult. And then finalization, that's the process of actually making agreement among the validators about what is the best improvement of the chain among kind of a tree of blocks that has been built up by the block production process, BABE, that is called Grandpa, which is another long acronym I don't remember exactly. But that's the same process we're using now, I believe. It's a 6-second block time. It's a 5-minute block length. So if you compare it to Bitcoin, I think I posted this in the Discord a while back, that would be equivalent to about a 500 megabyte block size, because Bitcoin has a block every 10 minutes, whilst we have one every 6 seconds. But so that's one limit. The other important limit is the amount of computation. This is sort of like the gas limit in Ethereum. And there is this concept of weight. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but this is basically a certain amount of time of computing on a reference machine. And basically 2 seconds on that machine is what's allowed for the block production process itself. So you could think of it as 2 seconds for, computing the transaction side effects, and then 4 seconds for sending those blocks out to for everyone to kind of process and be able to participate in the consensus process. So those are like some high level important constraints of the chain. Will there be a transaction task? Asks Sungoku. I don't know what you mean by transaction task. There will be transaction fees. Maybe that's what you mean. I'm getting to that here. But yes, you do need to charge some amount of joy, effectively, per transaction that's submitted. Otherwise, people can kind of do a denial of service attack on your chain and fill it with junk, which basically means people can't use it for anything sensible. So that's kind of unavoidable. The question is how much, and really the main drivers of that are going to be how much it costs for the consensus system to process your transaction computationally, and also for them to come to agreement about it. So sending the data around, whatever the actual consensus process is, for them to kind of figure out what everyone else thinks, so they come to agreement. So in our system, there are two kind of parameters. One is how much you charge for compute, and how much you charge for data. And we're charging basically 0.1 nanocents per unit of compute, if you want to think of it that way, and it's 0.1 millicent per byte of data in the block. So when you make a transaction, your transaction has some size in the block, which you have to pay for, but also it may be very compute intensive that you have to pay for. So both of those contribute to the final transaction cost. So here's an example. There was a really nice command that was added by one of our engineers, Lechek, for how to be able to just figure out quickly how much a kind of typical transaction of a given type costs. So that's the printout that you see here. So by membership, for example, if done under the assumption of a joy price of 6 cents, a membership price, so this is a price that the chain gets to set itself for creating memberships, of 833 millijoy, and then a handle of 10 bytes, a name of 10 bytes, about field of 0, an avatar length URI of 25 bytes. This works out to basically, if you read here, 5.2 cents. If you look at the printout. So you can do a similar kind of analysis for other key transactions. So creating a channel, for example, would cost 3.5 cents. Creating a video, which I think is going to be the most important transaction for us, because you only have so many channels, so that's fine. It's the number of videos that really needs to be able to scale for the system to scale well, because one channel will have tens or hundreds of videos in it. That's 1.39 cents. Adding a comment to a video is very, very cheap. It's 0.01 cents, and creating a forum thread is 1.7. There are ways to get these down further, and of course, there are some assumptions in here about like how, when I say creating a forum thread, well, how long is the post, and there are assumptions behind these, but you have to make some assumptions to come up with some estimates. But these are what they are basically, and I think the initial balance you get when you get invited, I think, should cover a fair number of these. So let's say, at least making a channel, uploading 30, 40 videos, commenting on. So maybe $1 is a reasonable invite balance for a new member. You could sort of work that out by looking at this and thinking about how a new person should be able to get involved. Okay, so I guess that's it. I hope that was elucidating. If you want to know anything more about it, feel free to ask in the chat or ask later after the call, and I'll try to get to it. So here are the questions that were posted this time around. So the first question is from Adavern. Does tokenomic allocate funds for the market maker? Many projects cost dust without it. I think it means that some things go bad without it. I think it's a useful activity. So market making, for those who don't know, is this activity of going on trading venues like an exchange or a DEX or something like that, and providing and setting a price in the order book for people so they can basically get your token or get out of your token without impacting the price too much. That's market making. Maybe not everyone knows that. And then there's a related question, I think is related, which you maybe will understand from my answer. Are there any new funding rounds planned? So I think what you'll increasingly hear from me, kind of on behalf of JS Genesis, is that everyone in the DAO really should not be looking to JS Genesis to really be doing anything important for the DAO post-launch. We've invested, a tremendous amount of effort in the DAO being able to operate on its own. I believe we have the most complicated and well-thought-out governance system for any DAO I've seen. And it's because we really have wanted the community to be able to run itself well, without any support from like experts or the original people. And of course, there's an idealistic side to it, but there's also a practical side to it, because there's the issue in our space when it comes to the relevance of kind of founding teams or issuing or launching teams, is that if you become seen as kind of a guarantor of a project, that can invite the kind of regulatory scrutiny for a token that can make it actually harmful to the project long term. It really, if you don't have that autonomy in the community, you may get regulatory scrutiny, which makes it difficult for the project to work with exchanges or brands or service providers of various kinds. And I think the best example of this for people, I hope people know who this is the Library project, which is another video blockchain kind of project. There are many differences between them and us, but they have landed in some hot water precisely because the kind of launching company has been so instrumental in the kind of further development of the project. So we're taking a very conservative approach. We're going to be very clear about not going out and promising all sorts of things about what we will or will not be doing. So that's kind of going to be my possibly unsatisfactory answer on this, but that's the way, unfortunately, we have to kind of deal with this topic at Avern. So I'm sorry to have to say that. Hansel says, I pray hard that Mainnet is moved again. Oh my God, I would literally turn into a Grinch if it doesn't launch in December. Well, I would too. We will move heaven and earth to make that possible. So yes, I mean, you never know. Things can happen, right? We've identified some things that possibly could imply things taking much longer if things don't work out the right way. So, it's kind of outside of your control, unfortunately, once you get to a certain kind of... Yeah, I don't think I can say anything more at this time, but basically, it's still uncertain, but I think it's going to be fine. Isn't it? Yeah, the name of the other project is LBRY. it's a really it's quite a big platform actually. You may know it more as Odyssey. I can't spell it for the life of me, but Odyssey. It's another platform built on LBRY, and basically that company, the LBRY company, was involved in kind of developing and being seen as the kind of maintainer and operator of that system in a way which basically got them sued by the SEC. And so that's been very costly for them, which is extremely unfortunate. But that's no one is kind of insulated from that. So you have to be careful. I think we're more careful than most people, but I'd like it to keep it that way. So that's why. All right. So next is maybe consider implementing V-token mechanics to get more Joy tokens out of circulation once mainnet is launched. V-token mechanics is implemented in Solidity, Convex Finance, and Solidly, and many other projects. So I'd never heard of this before. I had to do some research to get to the bottom of it, and for the life of me, I can't figure out what this actually is. So I can't answer this. I saw that it's some kind of curve finance related token locking thing where you put your money and then you get this other token, but I could not figure it out in time. So I think 0x 2BC, you'll have to explain this or point to some article for me to be able to address it. From the way it appeared to me, it was much more involved than would be feasible for us to start developing now. Certainly at that point, Hanzo would become the Grinch. I can assure you that would take a long time to do, and there wouldn't be a launch in this year, just from what I saw that in being involved, but what was involved in it. But yeah, Freak Static. The call is being recorded. Yes, so I am recording it using It's very embarrassing. I'm using QuickTime to record the screen output of my mixing software, because if you do it in Zoom, it records it in the worst possible video resolution. So I'm hoping that this is going to work better. But I did, in fact, initially begin speaking without recording, even in that mode, had it not been for, I believe Ismail told me to do so. All right. My voice is starting to give out, so let's try to get through this. I've noticed, says 0x2BC, that expected work group size is quite small at the beginning of the mainnet. Builders working group is supposed to be few people. Marketing HR is supposed to be even less. Will the existing dev team, by which I assume you mean people in JS Genesis, designer people, project managers, compete with the rest of participants for the working group seats? If no, will they still work for the JoyStream project in other formats? Yeah, so, and I think there's another question like this later. There's nothing that prevents people in JS Genesis from participating directly in the DAO. They may choose to do so under their official founding member identities, which associates them with JS Genesis in that way, or they just may make new accounts. So it's not clear that you would know unless they chose to, in fact, advertise that as a way perhaps for getting credibility, but nothing prevents them from our point of view. It did on the testnets, so we did make sure that on testnets you didn't have people kind of double dipping in both being active in JS Genesis and in the founding member program. That would be very dysfunctional. But on mainnet, there isn't actually any limit on that. I would like to see them participate because I know they have useful knowledge and information, but I don't know how many will. I haven't asked them, and I think ultimately it will depend on a lot of different factors, whether they actually do, regardless of what they would say. But yeah, so I hope that answers the question. I have no concrete information about who will do what or won't. They're not prevented from. They're not required to. It still remains to be seen, I think. So yeah. Yes, the call is being recorded. So Ngoku asked, will you join the council elections on mainnet? I have no plans to. I would hope not. So I have no plans to do that. And I think there are plenty of capable people who should be able to jump in that role and kind of set a strategy and set the agenda. So I have no plans to do that. All right, there is another question from Izanar. This was a longer one that requires some clarification. Izanar asks, in light of this post, why does Joystream go for imposing a global consensus requirement for video uploads? Could this functionality only have local consensus instead? I read the post. It was kind of unclear exactly what that meant. You could read it in a few different ways, but then the final answer was kind of, from Izanar's point of view, can the blockchain complexity be fully hidden from Joystream content creators just the way it is abstracted from the end consumer? I mean, like, completely hide the super complex inner workings of the DAO behind the simple interface. Do not require blockchain interaction from the content creators. Yes. So that's certainly possible. Now, first of all, I would say there's nothing in the, like, if you just look at Atlas right now, there's nothing that requires creators to deal with the DAO per se. There's just like, you have to deal with, a signer, transactions, stuff like that, which is still unusual for most creators to have to go and deal with, but not the DAO per se. But you have to deal with the blockchain, with fees. Even if you get your initial balance from a faucet and there's an invitation lock, for those of you who don't know what that is, we can get to it a lot of time, but you would still have to deal with fees, and you have to pay them, and there's latency and transactions being confirmed and all this kind of blockchain stuff. I think that can be abstracted away even more, but I think the only way to do that if you're prepared to have a custodied solution. So that would be a version of Atlas where the creator doesn't hold their own keys, because really that's where all of the pain and suffering comes from. If you're prepared to say, I want the Coinbase version of Atlas, so to speak. They hold my keys, they sign my creator tokens and my NFTs, and they own all. If they lose it, I'll sue them or whatever. That's the way I'm going to deal with it. But that also means I don't need to install an extension in my browser, and I can use it on lots of devices. I don't need to think about seed phrases and all this crazy stuff. Then that's possible. And I think that's probably worth pursuing as a way to enhance Atlas. That's not going to be possible within the scope of launching, but I think that it would be very useful, because it's not reasonable to require a creator to go to the most extreme level. Well, it's not most extreme, but to a very extreme level of self-custody just to get started, right? Just to make your own channel, right? That's a lot of friction. So you should be able to somehow get started, make a channel. Your keys will be held by the application. You start using the system with very little friction. Maybe you can use your email even to authenticate and get backup and kind of, you don't even have to think about a wallet. At some point, then, you would need to be able to say, okay, now that I have a lot of value in this channel and a lot of money, or it's kind of grown to a certain scale, I would now like to kind of export the authentication information. Now, there's no way to force an application to be built like that. There's no way to force someone from building a version of Atlas where you can't do that export step, which is a bit problematic. I am also concerned, to be honest, with just hacking, right? So I'm not sure I would dare run a version of Atlas where I had people's keys, because what if I get hacked or something? People will they'll be furious with me. What if, and also when you get hacked, people won't even be able to tell, did you take the keys or did the hackers take the keys? It's a lot of problems. And maybe there's also a regulatory side to it. I don't know, right? Are you supposed to like KYC everyone who makes an account if you have their keys? I have no clue, right? So there's just problems with that. So I hope that was a useful answer. There are problems, but there are opportunities as well. I got a long question here from Abichina Odo. So I have a few people I referred that has gone ahead to become founding members, but their name were not included in my referrals. Neither have they gotten bonuses. Okay, so I think I can't help you with that on this call. I would recommend you speak to HR, or if HR is not answering, which they probably are. Adovern answers everyone. It's really helpful. Why don't I can get in touch with Martin, who runs the points system, to get to the bottom of it. But I think on the call we should not get into that. Okay. Next question. Can resigned JS Genesis members join DAO instead? I think I already kind of answered that now. They don't need to resign from JS Genesis to join the DAO. Yes, people who actually have resigned, by which I think you mean they just don't work in JS Genesis, they could also join. So yes, they can. That's the answer. I don't know whether they will. Okay, last question, which is a very interesting one, is from 0xb2bc. Can you give a comment on today's news from USA? Specifically, the sentence, Bean and Kistner are liable for the DAO's allegedly illegal behavior because they hold UOKI tokens and voted on governance proposals related to how the DAO operated. Okay, I think this needs a little bit more context. I'm not super informed about this, but I know more than this question probably would convey to a new person who is unfamiliar. So there is a DeFi project, which was called BZX, I think, but then it was rebranded to Oki. And what they offer is some kind of margin trading platform, for people who use that protocol. I'm not sure what chain it's on. And I think at some point the protocol was turned into a DAO, and Bean and Kistner are two people in the US that were part of the founding team, who presumably then also have some of these UOKI tokens. And the CFTC in the United States, which is the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, which is a regulator in the United States, basically believes that this service that the protocol offers is not allowed to be offered by that protocol because the protocol has not gone through the required steps to offer that service. I don't know what those steps are. Probably involves registering yourself in some kind of a way, although I'm not sure how a DAO would even do that, but some kind of registering activity. Maybe you're supposed to do something with your users that the protocol isn't doing. So there's some kind of issue with the financial regulation that CFTC is involved with. And they've basically now sued. Well, it's not clear who they sued. I think they've sued both the DAO itself, which I think just means the DAO, some specific people in the DAO, but also anyone who may have held the token. It's really unclear to me. For basically being the people who run it, and they've asked for, I think, $250,000 in civil damages because they ran it and they didn't do it, and whoever is actually found to be responsible, which I think is kind of very unclear still, would have to pay and then promise to never, I guess, hold the tokens again, or, yeah, it's not clear exactly what they would be opting out of because they are sort of not running it in any conventional sense. So what do I think of this? I mean, first of all, I do find it very interesting. I don't know kind of how this is supposed to work if they take a very broad view of it, like if they say everyone who ever held or holds. I guess it's not even clear why you would restrict it to people who hold it now. Anyone who ever held it would in principle be just as much part of it, I suppose, from their point of view. At which point, like, if someone just sends them to you, or if you get an airdrop, then you then involved in this. So it kind of sounds complicated and not very workable approach. I don't know what will actually happen. I mean, a lawsuit is a lawsuit, and then you have to actually get a court to agree with you about this rather complicated matter. But yeah, it's complicated. I have no clue how various states in the U.S. or federal law will deal with this. It's interesting. What does it mean for JoyStream? I don't know that JoyStream as a platform does anything that obviously would fall under this purview of the CFTC. This was some kind of DeFi protocol, so obviously that's not what JoyStream is. I think the primary kind of place you would want to, well, the primary topic where the regulatory domain becomes relevant for JoyStream is like in the content side, what content are you distributing and to whom? And there I would presume that it really is up to the gateways to comply with the rules of the jurisdiction where they're serving various customers. And if they're not, then they would be at risk of actually doing something wrong. They have the customer relationship. They're the ones who have control over what the person sees or doesn't see. But honestly, maybe I should have started this whole spiel by saying I'm not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer. So I think there will be more interesting content made by actual crypto lawyers that you can kind of look at. And this is an evolving kind of question. Hasn't been much done in this area, but suffice to say, if you take this kind of approach, I mean, Polkadot, Uniswap, I can think of hardly any of the new systems don't have some kind of DAO-like structure in them. So it would be a very weird situation, at least. That's all I can say. I hope that's my point of view. If someone has something else useful to share around that, feel free to do so. I guess we'll have to just stand by and see. But financial products are very regulated in the United States. That's not news to anyone, I think, at this point. What about the Atlas name update, Adavern? So I think this is settled. There will be a renaming from Atlas to Gleev. So that's GLEEV. The only question remaining is what exactly should Gleev do? We have a domain for it, so it's already, the logos and stuff is being prepared, separate social media accounts. Atlas will remain the name of the source code itself. So when you talk about Atlas in the future, and we're going to make this distinction more clear, it's like the software toolkit. So you, Adavern, may choose to take Atlas, and then you make a new service called, I don't know, FooBar or something, and you have a mobile app called FooBar, and it's about whatever, pets or something like that, and it has its own set of features and stuff, but you would still be using Atlas, the software package. So there won't be an actual gateway called Atlas, at least that we will be doing anything with. Nothing prevents you from making one that is also called Atlas, but that's kind of confusing. So, but anyway, so that's the naming side at least. Okay, so my voice is about to give out, so I think we should probably wrap there. There haven't been any new questions, so I think it should be fine. I'm eager to see the quality of this recording. I think it's going to be quite a bit better. So, yeah, why don't we leave it there? Thank you for everyone who showed up. I really appreciate it. We had a really good turnout today. I wish we could see more people and speak to people more, but I don't have the technical proficiency to figure that out within the other things I have to do. So, unfortunately, we cannot. So, that's the way it is. Take care. See you next time, and thank you very much. Bye.